My next guest is someone who I think you will all recognize. By very popular demand, he's here with me today, and without further ado, I want to introduce the man of my dreams and certainly my better half, my husband, Matt. Here we are. Who would have ever thought that we would find ourselves sitting in a podcast studio? But nonetheless, here we are. So thank you for agreeing to do this. First and foremost, I know you have been incredibly excited to just open the pages of your life story and share even more with everybody. But I do really appreciate you being here. And first initial thoughts.
Well, like you said, I never thought I would ever be doing this. This was your story, although it involved me. It was your story to get
Just
out
a
there.
little.
And so, yeah, it's kind of crazy. I never thought I would be kind of talking in this capacity, but here we are.
Here we are.
Another adventure.
23 years of adventure. So we're just continuing to build. So obviously everybody knows the story as I've shared it. And before I shared the story, you said, you realize once you share that, that's going to be out there forever. And it is. And so let's just talk a little bit about how this all started. And so I've told the Holden Beach story and a Cliff's Notes version of the Holden Beach story. And this is not going to be a complete expose today, but let's just share a little bit about how we met. I've never gotten into that with everybody. So rewind back to October of 2002, and you had finished your residency and relocated to this small town in North Carolina, and we met. So talk about that a little bit. And of course, I have some things that I'm going to ask specifically just to test your memory, and I've always got the receipts. But anyway, We met. Do you remember when we met or how we first met?
Well, it was at the office, and I was like, who is this guy? Because I had come from a relatively larger city to this small town, which I grew up in a small town, so it's not about that. But so I was kind of coming from sort of like a really high-paced, busy kind of city, and coming to this smaller town.
It's okay. We can say Memphis, so we can shout out to Memphis to our friends in Memphis.
And I don't know. We just had a group of friends. We were always doing things. Had a group of guys that I played basketball with, and so I was like, oh, this guy looks like he's probably athletic, and he probably, is a sports person. And again, I'm not a huge sports person, but I love to play basketball. And I was like, hey, you want to get together? We get a group together, and we'll start playing basketball. And then
I was like, absolutely not. Yeah, sports are not my thing. So, but thank you. I remember very well that day. I remember what you were wearing. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask what I was wearing, because I know the answer will be I don't remember. Yes, but I remember exactly what you were wearing, and I remember your personality really was captivating to me. And of course, as everybody knows, or we'll remind everybody, we were both married to women at the time, and I remember it very well, and just very carefree and laid back, much like you are now, but I just know a different side of that 23 years later. But I do remember the basketball. And the other thing that would happen subsequent to that is I remember I would get a call about 9:00 at night saying, oh, are you sure you don't want to go and play basketball? I'm like, no.
Was it basketball, or was it like, let's go out to dinner or something like that? Because that was the thing that we would always do. It's like we were always just a group of friends, and we were always like, let's go to dinner every night or whatever. And then like we get to Boone, and like everything closes at like 8:00, 9:00, or
in
7.
the winter. Yes.
So it was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? But anyway, yeah.
Yeah. So it was, but yes, I remember I would get those late calls like, oh, do you want to do something like 2 days from now or not?
What was
like,
your
no,
rule? No call after 10:00 or something. I don't know.
Okay, no, that is not my rule. That is someone else. Yeah, the 9 and 9 rule. But yes, mine's pretty much. Yes, pretty much. So we became couple friends and started spending a lot of time together. Lots of Chinese carry out, and I remember it was either the first or second season
Yeah. We're dating ourselves here, but
we are of American Idol.
Yeah.
So I think, did we see Kelly Clarkson?
Kelly Clarkson.
That's right.
Ruben, all of those people.
Right. Oh, Ruben stuttered.
Yeah.
I haven't thought of
Clay
anybody.
Aiken.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
All that. I think, was Kelly Clarkson in that same?
She was the first one. Kelly was the first, I believe, first winner of American Idol. But anyway, okay. So spent more and more time together, and then we had a trip. And there are varying degrees of stories of how the trip occurred, but it was an office bonding trip. So we will just leave it as that.
Which you set up.
Right, exactly. And so we went to Holden Beach, and we had traveled as couples at this point. We had traveled as couples.
I think we went to Miami. Remember, we would go out in Miami, like all four of us.
Yes.
We stayed at the Delano Hotel.
I do.
We went to bed, the club bed or whatever.
Which was a very weird concept because you actually had cocktails sitting on a bed. So that was kind of odd. I do remember, and there was a steakhouse we went to where there were acrobatics.
Live performance.
Yes, it was really what you would expect in Miami Beach.
Course.
So we did that, and then May of 2003 arrived, and we went on this office trip to Holden Beach, North Carolina, which interestingly, we recently had somebody from Wilmington call out Holden Beach. So clearly they followed the story. We were doing a live. It was one of your cameo appearances on one of my lives that I do. And the person had obviously read the story. So we go to Holden Beach. We're with everybody from the office. And eventually the time came for us to go to bed. And being the only males, we were in the same room with two double beds. And what is your recollection up to a point of kind of, because this is a question that has been asked a lot. What did you talk about? Like, you know, who made the first move? And we're going to spare everybody some of those details. I know everybody's wanting to know some of that, but you know, what is your recollection about that night whenever we retired to our room?
Retired to our room.
That sounds very Downton Abbey-esque, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Okay, what time that we went to bed? So yeah.
No, so I remember, and you know, we had gone to this really nice house on the Intercoastal, and had a really nice time with all the people from the office. And I mean, there was no anticipation at least on my part, that there was really going to be anything that would happen. And so I remember going to bed, and we were just talking, and we talked for probably hours, and
at least over 3 hours.
Yeah. And it sort of like took a turn of like these different conversations about growing up, and, you know, I don't even remember the specifics, but it was kind of like alluding to, you know, same-sex experience and just different things. And to be honest, I felt like, where is this going? Because I was like, you know, as a person who's never, you know, I don't know, I wouldn't say been out or whatever. I mean, you know, I'm married, so that's the bottom line. I'm married.
This is
like,
pushed so far down at this point.
So there's no like, and I was like, is this guy trying to entrap me and then sort of like blackmail me? And I know that's really horrible to think that way, but I think when you have suppressed whatever, you know, for so long, that your mind goes to those really crazy thoughts of like, you know, what's going on here? Why is he saying and asking all these things? And, you know, we work together. Is this meant to kind of like, you know, be used against me if I were to be completely honest with somebody about any of these kinds of things maybe that have happened or whatever? So it was just but it was like a very like natural conversation at the same time. It was very strange. I don't know. Very weird.
Right. I think I would agree. It was comfortable and strange. But it's, maybe you're feeling like I'm entrapping you here today, even. So it could be.
Well, I feel like I've been roped in. No, just kidding. But
exactly. It could be having flashbacks. But so things progressed. And that evening we had our first physical encounter and went to sleep. The next morning we woke up, and I remember we were going for a run. And I said to you, do you feel strangely about what happened last night? And I remember your response, and I don't know if you remember what you said to me.
Well, I mean, so no, I didn't feel like it was something. The experience was bad in the sense of like, or even felt weird, oddly, the next morning about it. What I felt the most horrified by was the fact that I was married and essentially now had been unfaithful. And that was just like, that is what blew my mind. Not even oddly enough that it had been that now I've, had this experience with another male. And that was really sort of what I was just absolutely like floored by and
Incomprehensible, basically.
right.
And
I just didn't know how to even react or how to act the next day. But again, it oddly enough wasn't about the experience.
Yeah. No, I would agree. And I remember when you said that, because I think it would be fair to say that I'm a bit more of an emotional person than you are, just a little. But I think for me, my emotions were all over the place. But that's also, I mean, I remember when you said that, that really kind of framed for me as well. What I was feeling is not uncomfortable or not awkward about what had happened, but it was the fact that we had other people involved and had just, drug other people into it.
And them not knowing it, that they've been
Correct.
drug into something now that was going to change the trajectory of all of our lives.
Correct. And so that day progressed, and you and I ended up on a jet ski, and you were driving. And this is, for me, if we're going to talk about an aha moment, it's something that you said to me that I want to ask you a little bit about, kind of your experience. But someone had fallen off of another jet ski, and we were just waiting and kind of idling. And I was behind you. And while we were doing that, do you remember you turned over your right shoulder and asked me a question?
Well, yeah. So I'm just processing all of this, and I'm just thinking, you have to probably have known that you're gay, and again, I use the word gay, but I think I said, how long have you known you're gay?
You
And
did.
really what I meant by that was not so much the tag of gay or the label of gay per se. What I meant by that, I think, was how long have you had same-sex attraction? Because I think for me, I had never considered myself gay. That was just not a...
Nor had I.
That is not something that was even on my mind. And so, although I had same-sex attraction, which I kind of dismissed as, but I'm not a typical person. I mean, that just doesn't fit me. It doesn't fit my personality. It doesn't fit a lot of things, which, as we all know, there is no one way to be gay. So it was like, I didn't have that concept, but yeah, that's the word that I actually used, meaning how long have you had same-sex attraction?
And I think that you just made a good point that I do want to touch upon this, because this is something that, a lot of people have said, oh, you knew when you were getting married. And, I wasn't able either to ever articulate or quantify what it was that I made me feel differently or notice males versus females. But, I think we grew up, I mean, you're a few years older than I am, but I'd have to get get that in, right? Just minimal, but still older. So, as you and I were growing up in the 1980s, it was during, the whole AIDS scare, and I have described it as what I saw is not something that was relatable to me. Just the most flamboyant of people that were
Right.
in the media, and I think that's what you're referencing. Like,
Right.
you were. You played tennis, you played basketball. Like, there were things that you were doing that you were like,
I
I
enjoyed
don't.
science. I enjoyed, I was such a plane buff. I loved aviation, all these different things. Like, I was thinking about getting my pilot's license in residency. So like all of these things. And again, it's just, I think, just the limited exposure of like, being gay is
Exactly.
one way. And, we had obviously less, exposure when we were younger, because we didn't have social media. And so there's, I think, a very limited idea of what you thought being gay meant.
Sure.
So anyway,
And so, yeah, I just wanted to clarify because that's very much what I felt with it. So you turned to your right. You said, "How long have you known you were gay?" And for me, excuse me, that was completely pivotal because at that time my left hand was on your left shoulder, and I got ready to say to you, and I've shared this many times over our time together, got ready to say, "Oh, I'm not gay. That was experimentation." And the sun hit my wedding band, and that stopped me in my tracks. And I said to you, since I was about 6, and again, not knowing gay,
right,
gay, but the same sex attraction. And
right,
so
or having something that you just couldn't really put your finger
couldn't
on
really
what it
quantify
was.
what
Right.
it was, or qualify. So that was my answer. And so that it was about 6. So for you, that was a long time ago. I was 28 at the time, so 22 years prior. But it's something that I had just continued to push down in my life, and tuck away, and continued to check boxes and do everything that I thought, much like you did, that we thought we were supposed to do and in life and so on. And for you, what would you say, or when would you say that you first felt that something was a little bit different? I mean, it was age 6 for me, but if you think about that, what would it be for you?
Well, I can't come up with an actual age, but all I can say is that since I can remember,
Mhm.
so I would imagine that's 5, 6, 4. I don't know.
Fair enough.
That it was always sort of this, affinity for males. But again, it's kind of like that was, what is that? What does that mean? Like
Right.
I, I certainly didn't put a label on it. I didn't know what it was. And it didn't seem unusual or abnormal until as you get older, you start to think this is probably not the way I should be thinking about it. And, that starts to come from, I think, societal pressure, from, just
Well, and our
norms, social
friends,
norms,
your friends are talking about dating girls, and you're like,
parents,
I
like
don't
all
have
those
that
things.
interest.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So
okay. So we got through that day, we got through the next day, and then you were going out of town on a trip with your ex-wife. So here we are at this point in the throes of all this. I know more about you than anybody else knows. You know more about me. We've shared this secret that we have both thought that we had successfully tucked away for over 2 decades. And I drop you off at the airport, knowing full well that if you say anything, it's going to out me. And you're knowing if I say anything, I'm going to out you. And we had known each other at this point for maybe 7 months. So this was a lot.
mhm.
And we were separated for a week. You were out of the country, and everybody needs to keep in perspective that this was in 2003. So we didn't have really texting. I mean, the things that we have now, that were the immediacy of connection and contact and so on. So,
This was the time of internet cafes also. So there was no
and there you
Wi-Fi in most people's homes. And so you would go to an internet cafe.
go, which you did on this
I
trip.
did.
And I would literally, like a little kid waiting for Santa Claus to come down the chimney, be
For an email.
waiting for an email. And I would get we would have one email exchange a day. I don't know if you would wait until I would write back, probably not. So you would see my reply the next day, but you would go to an internet cafe. So that's for a week. During this period of radio silence, this is how we communicated. No verbal communication. And then you got back and you called me on your way home from the airport. And I remember, and I want to hear what you remember about that call. But for me, that was like the ultimate temperature check, where it was like, how were you acting? And the fact that you called, because my concern had been, or was, that you were just going to sever all contact. And maybe you had a similar, so I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts were. But like, okay, I'm not going to continue anything with this guy other than just being at work, and it's going to be totally different. I didn't know what to expect, but that phone call kind of was a different level for me of, okay, this is what he said about not feeling strangely about the encounter is definitely true, despite what was going on. So how did you feel when you called and I answered the phone and we reconnected?
Well, I mean, I think I was concerned about maybe what had happened while we were also on radio silence. You were on radio silence to a certain extent. And I mean, there was just no way to know what everybody was thinking at that point. And, whether or not there was going to be sort of, as you said, sort of like, this is, this is, over. I've had a conversation with my ex-wife, or not ex-wife, but your wife at the time, and, vice versa. And so it was just a very, I think, confusing time. But really, I think what I wanted to do was to come together and talk about it and figure out what the next steps were. Because for me, I didn't feel strangely about it, but I felt horrified about the whole affair part of it. But there was just something that was just so, I guess, connecting and strong too at the same time. And it was just the oddest time, I'll be honest. And it was, didn't know what was going to happen, but I think we decided we were going to meet and talk.
And we did. We met on June 6th. You leave it to me to keep the receipts, but June 6th of 2003, after work. And as we were getting in our cars to go home to our wives, you made a statement that was an incredible foreshadowing of what was getting ready to happen, and we did not know. And you said,
well, do we need to back up, though, and talk about what we talked about there? I think what we both said was, at least how I was feeling at that time, is like, this needs to go back into the box that it came out of.
And what word? Do you remember what word you said? We need to figure out how to reassimilate.
Reassimilate.
That is exactly, those were the words. And I was like, if I ever hear the word reassimilate again, I'm going to pull every hair in my head out. But anyway, we don't talk about that anymore. So that's a good thing. But yes, how we are going to reassimilate, how we are going to put this back.
Remember, I'm in this small town.
Just starting in practice, building a practice.
I had all the other social norm pressures
that I want to talk about a little bit here in a few minutes.
On top of everything else. And then, like I said, most importantly, the fact that I was married. And that's not just something you just go like, oh, whatever, and undo it. Like, it just was not even, it's not even a possibility. Like, and so I was on the sort of train of, this needs to stop, this needs to end, and whatever. So that building back up to what I said.
And let me just say for a second, when we're talking about reassimilating, I think it's important for people to understand. I mean, you've gone 4 years to undergraduate school, 4 years to medical school. You've done 1 year of an internship. You changed specialties and then have spent another 4 years in training, and you have just started in private practice. You're in this small town. And of course, you're thinking, that's the end. This will ever come out. Right.
Like, if this were to ever happen, this would be scandalous. This would be the end of my career. Because, and we can talk about this, but, also, I just didn't know, and I didn't know necessarily successful gay people in general, like generally.
Correct. And I think that's important to mention. That was my limited
exposure of, like, I just didn't foresee a way forward.
We didn't know of it. We didn't know any gay people that, And I think, to your point, what we saw was not positive in the media. Right. Like, as you and I were growing up, it was very, very sensationalized, and it wasn't positive. It wasn't people who have been productive members of society and have been, become successful. It was, just kind of people really down and out and very flamboyant. It just was a very different persona. So take us back to June 6th. We're getting in our car. June 6, 2003, we're getting our cars, and you said to me,
well, I said, the only way that this could be more complicated is if one of our wives told us that they were pregnant. And
you did.
I was like,
you did, and they did. So I went home.
And they did.
They did. And I went home and found my ex-wife crying on the couch. And I said, what's wrong? And she immediately announced that she was pregnant. And she was crying because we had been with you and your ex-wife the weekend before, and alcohol had been consumed. So she was concerned that she had harmed the baby. And she then said, because as I have shared, you were her physician. And she said, call Matt. So I did, and I stepped out onto the front porch. Everybody had landlines still, so it was a cordless phone. So I went out and made sure the antenna was up. That's right. And I called you, and I remember, I don't know if you remember that call. I remember there being a long period of silence after you realized I was not joking.
It was just like, that
surreal.
Is unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Like,
surreal.
Could not believe it. Like, as if there was not enough going on with all that had just happened. And then to find this news out was just like, oh my gosh, I don't know. It was just a lot.
It was a lot. That's the way to put it. So we all four got together that night and we had a celebratory dinner, and it was surreal. I remember that being a very, very, very surreal time. People thought that I was freaking out and having a meltdown over having a child, and I'm
being a father,
being
just
a father
nervous about that, and
and I'm thinking that's like, I think I probably will be able to do that okay, but it's like the rest of this, I don't know how this is possibly going to work out. So that summer we spent a lot of time together as couples, and you and I were still together and doing a lot that summer. Our wives actually encouraged that, which was also difficult. It
just
because
felt
again,
icky, like that stuff.
I would agree. That's a good word, is icky.
Oh.
So we did a lot. There was a Las Vegas trip. We actually went camping, which for me that's really something for me.
Yeah. By the way,
go ahead and tell
hiking
it.
Boots,
yes, I knew you'd love to tell this story.
Of course, he's like, well, yeah, I've got some Cole Haan day hikers. I'm like, no, real hiking boots. Okay.
Yeah. So, well,
anyway.
Cole Haan considered them hiking boots, so whatever. But yeah, you're like, you would fall in those. But so a lot went on that summer, and I know for me, I know what that summer was like, and I want to share that and then talk a little bit about that, and then I want to hear what that was like for you. But for me, it really became it became more than I could handle from both an emotional standpoint and a psychological standpoint. My wife, who I cared very much about, I think was feeling that it was because of her pregnancy that I was withdrawing from her. So there was additional hurt that I was causing there. And I remember I would leave the office every afternoon, and there was a picnic area that I would go, and I would literally just go and sit and cry there and try and think about how this was all going to work out and how just what it was going to mean. Because at this point, you and I were developing a much stronger emotional connection and emotional bond. And it was just the war of two worlds, really, in my mind. I mean, it was really an unbelievable time. And we continued, as the voice of reason, we continued the conversations of how are we going to reassimilate. And, I think for me, I had my own ways that I was kind of coping with everything. I mean, there were certainly distractions with the pregnancy, things like that. But how was that for you during that period as you were, quote, coping with that 3-month period during the summer of 2003? What was that like for you?
It was absolutely awful because you're living in this, I mean, there was like, the stress of, I don't know, for me, it was just like really heavy, like with our relationship with my wife. It was awful because, I was trying to figure out how to get back to what it was before, which was by this point not going to happen. But I didn't believe that. I believed that, no,
you could turn it around.
I can turn this off. I can, put this back in the box where it came from. But she also knew obviously that there was something going on, but she didn't know what. And that was awful. It was, people ask you, um, in your, journey that you've been doing, telling this story, and, what is the one thing you would change? And that for me was the thing that, I just wish that there had not been another person involved that got hurt. And there's just nothing that I would ever want to do to harm or hurt anybody, because that person was, my soulmate. She was, I loved her. And I didn't go into, a marriage lightly to say, well, let me try this on for size and see how it works. It was not that. But it just was such a hard battle the whole summer of trying to figure out how to put that back into place. And it just, after that happened, it just didn't seem like that was going to happen, even though I kept trying.
It was like a futile,
It was futile.
exercise
It was like,
in futility. Did you feel, for you, I mean, I know how I felt. Did you feel that you were just truly living the ultimate lie, and
yeah,
just
it was
more
awful.
so than being in the closet during that period?
Yes.
For me, I would agree, because somebody else was involved who you cared very
Right.
deeply, loved and cared very deeply for. You thought you were going to spend
Right.
the rest of your life with that person. Do you remember there being any normalcy or anything about that summer, that 3-month period, that felt normal?
No.
I don't either.
It was,
Everything was upended, and I think that I don't.
there was the pregnancy, that was going on, and there continued to be like couples trips, and we would get together for things. And it was just, awful. It was, it was emotionally awful for us. It was emotionally, I think, awful for, I'm not going to speak for them, but for our wives, because they,
Yes.
I think, knew that something was going on, or they didn't know what was going on, but that I think they both sensed that things were not right. And I don't think at any point did they expect or suspect that it was something between us.
I think it's something that actually, sitting here all of these years later, it is still difficult, and I think there's still pain there, because the guilt, I mean, it's something that you and I dealt with, and I'm not saying this at all, and I don't want people to misinterpret that this is a sympathy garnering statement. It's not. I'm just calling it for what it is. But there was guilt that took us both a really, really long time to work through. Obviously, we left a great deal of hurt behind, but the guilt, I mean, sitting here talking about it, it's still, I remember, and I think that was one of the most prevalent feelings that I had that summer, and for a very, very long time after, was just guilt. Like, just this awful, overwhelming feeling of guilt, and sorrow for all the aftermath that was going to be left. And I want to talk about a little bit about, life for you growing up. I've shared, with people who follow along quite a bit. But during this time, if you can describe what your biggest fears were, both personally and professionally, as you and I were in this relationship, extramarital relationship, same-sex relationship, yet we're married to women. What were your biggest fears during that 3-month period until we told our wives? What were your biggest fears personally and professionally, would you say?
Well, that this was going to be discovered without me being able to kind of put it all back and act like it didn't happen with, my wife, to somehow figure that out. And it was professionally that I would not be able to, continue practicing. I thought it was going to be so devastating that it would end my ability to be, a physician, which obviously in retrospect, that's not the case. But at that time it was irrational, or what I thought at the time. And then there was the disappointment, not only my fear of disappointing my wife, professional, but also my parents, my ex-wife's parents, all of those things. Like there was just, in friends even, like there were so many things that, I thought was going to be just completely upended, shredded, normalcy would never be there for me again. And so,
or for anybody, for our wives either.
And so for anybody. And so, just trying to figure out how to, again, I keep saying this, but reassimilate, put this back in the box of where it came from and just act like things didn't happen. And that fear and that was a very big driving force through all of this.
Mm-hmm. So the day came that you and I both on our own felt that it was time to tell our wives, and we had a conversation that afternoon. It was September 7th, 2003. It was a Sunday. We had that conversation. I remember us talking and both really being at the same time that we could not go on with this whole charade anymore. And I certainly don't want to get into, the conversation directly with our wives, because I think that's speaking for people, and that was a very private conversation. But, we had that conversation that night with our wives, and that was incredibly difficult. Definitely ranks up there for one of those most difficult conversations ever in life. And there have been some, but that was really an awful thing. And so, I think what I would say is after that happened, our lives took a very, very different path, obviously. And what would you say you missed about your life before? And what did you say was new for you, or was a different experience that you liked about kind of that new life forward after September 7th, 2003?
I think, for me, it was sort of missing the idea of what I thought was a normal life, in the sense of
that white picket fence,
having kids and, family around, and, just sort of like having a normal, quote unquote, normal life. And, sort of what had been built up so far. And then potentially just losing all of that, and, feeling almost like I'm going to be destitute. I'm just going to be like, this is just going to be a mess. And so sort of after the fact, though, after the devastation and sort of like letting everybody know, what was going on. And by the way, we had always said that we had to tell, if one of us got to a point where we needed to say something before the other, that was kind of like going to be dragging that other person into it, because once one person says something, even if that other person's not ready, that was going to be,
that's it.
That was it. So,
Yeah.
And it's really interesting how we both had gotten to the point on completely separately. We had not talked about this
at all.
Gotten to the point where we just couldn't, the burden of what was going on, and the deception, and the trying to, live our lives in such a duality way, or a dual way. It was just too much. And so it happened that we did actually come to those terms and realization at the same time.
And I think for me, and I think you would probably agree, that at that point it felt like I was really delaying the inevitable of having that conversation. And it's like I'm kicking a can down the road, the can being the conversation, and I'm dragging people along with me, and kind of how do we make this right as we can.
But then, so what moving forward, kind of felt, it was almost like there was this weight lifted off of, I don't know what lies ahead. I'm really scared about what lies ahead. But for the first time, I'm able to kind of say, this is who I am, and be honest with myself. And so there was a great deal of comfort in that, I think, that I could say, this is finally, I'm coming to terms with who I am. And, there is this massive amount of devastation in its wake, but which none of us ever would have wanted to have caused. And but finally I was able to start to build a path forward, whatever that path was going to be, of being honest and being true. And it was such an interesting thing to feel like that. At least I knew moving forward, I could be more myself, and
Yes.
Which was strange.
And one of the things that I did a post on very, very early, you'll remember, was something that your nurse said to me. And when this was announced to the entire staff, it actually makes me emotional thinking about it, because she was such, and is such an incredible advocate and supporter and ally for us. But she emotionally came forward and said to me, "You must feel so much better," as she hugged me in front of the whole staff, who, most people, there were jaws on the floor. But, this is with my wife, who is 5 months pregnant roughly at the time. You're going through a separation. I'm trying to work out a separation. But that really resonated with me. And I think what you're saying is there was this unbelievable burden that had been lifted in the midst of this Category 5 hurricane, that we were like in the eye of that storm. And at first that really took me back when she said that, but it was actually so very true. So very true. And, one of the things that I want to talk a little bit about is, because I think that there's been a lot of interest. There have been a lot of questions to me about my upbringing. And so for you, just talk a little bit about, you're an only child, as I'm an only child. But, we grew up in very different places, but just talk a little bit about that. Maybe the values and kind of how religion and what that was like, in your house, and how you think that, maybe had a role as well.
Well, I mean, my background, was I grew up in a small town in East Tennessee, and I had amazing, wonderful parents who worked very hard, sacrificed for me, but made sure that I had everything and more that I needed. And they made sure education was so important to them. And so they made sure that I got everything that I needed, whether it was doing enrichment programs in the summer, or whether it was, sending me on a trip to Europe, in high school for, the German club trip. But so all of those things. And so they really supported me. They were loving and caring, and I couldn't have asked for better parents. And it's not a but but I say but.
You said but.
I know. I know. So church was very important in our family, and it was a very conservative church. It wasn't conservative like Southern Baptist, like organized church, very big, powerful church or something like that, or Catholic church. But it was Free Will Baptist Church. And the people that went to that church were absolutely amazing people and lovely, just good country, good people.
We have some good cookbooks from that church.
Good cookbooks from that church. And they're still wonderful people. But, I think, and to be honest, I don't ever remember, gay or homosexuality being a huge topic of conversation in my family, or and as far as that religious background was concerned. But obviously that did shape me, because that did play a part of, like, even though it wasn't talked about a lot, it was something that I feel like that, was kind of implied that, that was not acceptable. And so that certainly shaped me in terms of how I felt about these same-sex attractions that maybe I felt that, that was always wrong. And, and partly probably because of that upbringing. But Yeah, I mean,
but a
was
very loving house.
a very
and,
loving house.
And open and welcoming to other people.
Oh, unbelievably open and welcoming.
Including other ethnicities I know you've shared before from your medical school and residency.
Yeah, friends from medical school. So, but yeah, that's kind of my background. And then, of course, growing up in a small town. And I mean, you know, growing up in this small town, as you sort of said earlier, it was like everybody was starting to date girls, and, you know, all my friends were, and, you know, I tried to also do that, and it just seemed so forced for me to try to do that. And it just didn't seem natural for whatever reason. But certainly I tried. I did the things I thought I was supposed to do. And again, thinking about that sort of ideal, like, you know, family of, you know, getting married, having kids, and, you know, going to medical school and just having this whole, you know, perfect ideal life. And that's kind of like, I think, you know, I don't know where that comes from other than society and, you know, parents and all those things. Not that they ever pressured me to do anything. I was the first person actually to go to medical school in my family. And so again, that was my background, and my parents like really worked hard, and they wanted me to have a better life. And I think, you know, sort of jumping ahead, because you may have this question down the road, but I think jumping ahead to sort of, you know, in the end, when I did come out to them and all this happened, you know, I think part of what their concern was how, you know, being gay is going to make it difficult for you in life.
Their concern was for you.
Right. And how that's going to make life difficult. And nobody wants their kids to have a difficult life.
To struggle, right.
And to struggle. And I think a lot of their concern came from that. And certainly I think, you know, there was the religious part of it as well. But yeah.
But it was really, I think, as you said, I mean, I think it was a lot of it was concern for you and what life would be like on this new path.
Because if I, who had been to college and then was in med school, had this idea of like what gay people are or are not, the stereotypes, what have you, think about them who really had not been to college, who
very limited exposure,
and you know, this idea was probably more even ingrained in their eyes of what, you know, life would be like as a gay male.
I mean, the town where you grew up was a radius of how far from where they had grown up. I mean, this was what they knew, and you know what they knew, and so we at some point we may get into this a little bit more if you grace me with your presence here once again. I know you're so excited at that thought alone, but. Let's fast forward 23 years. So here we are, 2026. And what is this like if you had to sum up, is this life what you would have ever envisioned either before everything started with us, during that 3-month period of everything going on when everything was so completely tumultuous? Is this ever what you thought that it would be?
That I would be sitting in a podcast talking about this 20 some years later. These were like conversations we would have on drives and cars where we would talk about all of this stuff. No, I mean, so I think for me in giving hope is that I remember you took me to the airport. I was going somewhere, and I think it was during this 3 months. Oh no, it was after we had come out to our wives and everybody else and our parents. And you were taking me to the airport to drop me off for a flight. And I was driving there, and I was like, I wonder if we will ever be able to, and this is how ridiculous it is, if we'll ever be able to travel together in like some sort of normalcy in all of this chaos that we had. If it's even like, as weird as that sounds, like be able to just take a trip
without being a spectacle,
without this being an issue. And so, you know, fast forward to where we are now, did I think that we would be having this life that we have now? No. I mean, at that time, it was so hard to envision what the future would hold and what it would look like. And I think, you know, the main thing is starting out to be honest and working through all of that with yourself. And then, you know, we started to meet people. We started to have.
There were other gay people
There
in
were
the
other
world.
gay people
I
in
mean,
the
who
world.
knew? Who knew? Right?
That were normal. And again, there's no normal. I say that sort of tongue in cheek because there's no normal. Like, there is the spectrum of people, and there's nothing wrong or right about anything, but just sort of like feeling normal, and, you know, having a life that, you know, we had a daughter that I was able and fortunate to be able to deliver, thanks to.
I didn't even get into all that.
I know, right? Yeah. Well, that's another story, but it's on your socials. But yeah, I mean, like, to then.
Thanks to my ex-wife's grace.
Right.
And
thanks to her grace, and having, you know, a house together, you know, being invited to dinners and going out and things, like all these things that suddenly it became normal, and there was normalcy again. It didn't happen overnight, but, like, you know,
a new normal.
Yeah, it's a new normal. And it's like this sort of, like, you thought this could never happen, like in those dark months, you thought there's never going to be any normalcy in my life ever, and then fast forward and it was, and there is. And that's, I think, what's truly amazing about this is that, you know, coming from where we were and having our life experiences of where we were to where we are now, and, you know, it's almost incomprehensible now that we're sitting here talking about it. So it's,
as my mom used to say, the good in the bad drink that went on for a period of time. And one final question I have that's a serious question, and that is, if you could give a younger Matt, we'll say younger Matt, advice, somebody, yourself at that age, who's going through everything that we went through or was really struggling with their identity, what would that be?
Well, it would be true to yourself and be honest with yourself, because ultimately, you're living a lie if you're not being true to yourself and honest with yourself. And the situation may be difficult to do that. But for me, finally doing it, even though it was done at a later period and that came along with a lot more people being involved, I would just say, try to do that as much as you can early on. And I know that's difficult. That's easy to say. It's like saying, you know, oh, don't trip on that. You know, it's like, it's not that easy. There's a lot of work that goes into it, but being able to, you know, early on, be honest with yourself. And that way nobody else is involved and people know the real you, which is what really matters. And if people don't like the real you, then maybe those people are not the people for you to have in your life, because you're being something else that you're not if you're not being honest.
Very well said, and thank you. I know this was not something that you were absolutely springing out of bed this morning to come here and do, so I appreciate you doing it for me and really for everybody else's benefit, everyone else's benefit as well, so that they can hear another perspective. I think that's super important, and I will try and be persuasive to get you back here, on occasion. But I appreciate you very much doing this. And before we go, I have to have a little bit of fun, and we're going to ask, because people love lifestyle questions. So I'm going to ask you some fun lifestyle questions, and I'm going to start with a
rapid fire,
relatively easy one. Favorite chef?
Ina Garten.
The Barefoot Contessa. I knew it. Yeah. So most of these I'm going to know the answer to. Some
You're
are going to
asking them for the audience.
Right. So. Exactly. So I'm going to ask you favorite. You love scents. So favorite candle.
Oh, that's Diptyque Fig.
I was going to say Diptyque Fig. I knew that. Favorite cologne, because
there's a lot.
I was going to say I'm normally in a cloud of cologne each morning or each evening before we're going out. So what are your favorites, or what is your favorite right now?
Favorites, Le Labo Santal, and there are a couple from this department store in Liberty, in London that we discovered, which funny enough, I found the first fragrance in Rome, and it was like
Yes.
from London. And then we were back in London in January and went to the department store, the Liberty department store.
We sure did. And boy,
and they
did I
make
have a
these
headache.
fragrances that are for the department store, but they're made by all of these amazing people that do a lot of the other fragrances, but they make them specifically for Liberty. So these are really cool fragrances that they have. So those are two. And then there's the other that I wear sometimes, which is from Santa Maria Novella in Florence. That's where the perfumery is, in an old convent.
Yes,
a monk.
Yes, and so it is always an adventure.
It's
always an
around the
adventure
world.
to go anywhere that there is a scent that you can spray, because you're going to spray it multiple times. So yes, I think of Santa Maria Novella in Florence. I come out of there with a headache, and Liberty in London, I came out with a headache. Favorite food to cook?
Italian always.
Okay.
Yeah, Italian is always good. But like Ina Garten does amazing simple stuff. So she'll do French, she'll do American cuisine, all kinds of different things. And so her recipes I love because they're simple, but you have to use really good ingredients. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. And then favorite Friday night. What is an ideal Friday night for you after you've worked all week? What does that look like?
Well, it's coming home, getting ready, going to dinner, having a nice dinner, usually quiet, not crazy, coming home and going to bed.
Yes, early. So Matt, thank you again. I appreciate the serious questions. I appreciate you answering the fun questions as well. But thank you again for being here. And I seriously hope you will do it again. I'm going to work my hardest to persuade you to be here again. But thank you. I really do appreciate it. And it was fun chatting with you.
It was. Glad to be here. And I cannot believe that I did this, but I did it. So
You did it. You did it.
But yeah, I mean, it's hopefully helpful to people.
I think it will be. Thank you.